How, as a society, can we continue to allow the most vulnerable among us to fall through the cracks? That's the question that comes to mind in the case of Kaylea Titford. This is a truly devastating story of a young girl with significant medical needs who was utterly failed by her caregivers and everyone else in her surrounding community. But with that, it's so important to highlight cases like Kaylea's because things like this continue to happen every day, and each of us needs to do our part to keep an eye out for the safety of our most vulnerable populations. But before we get into the case, I want to remind you all that CrimeCon 2025 in Denver is right around the corner. It's the weekend of September 5th through the 7th this year, but it's going to come up so quick. I had such a blast at the last one, meeting you guys at the event and then especially getting to hang out at the bar and chill afterwards. It's always such a great time, truly getting to know you guys, letting loose, talking about the cases that are so important to us and just getting to know each other as people. I made so many amazing friends who I hope to see again this year, and I hope to make some new friends as well. So don't wait to get your passes. I believe the VIP tickets are already sold out, but there's still time to get your standard pass, and you can save a little bit extra when you use my code RachelShannon at checkout. Once again, that's code RachelShannon when you purchase your standard pass for CrimeCon 2025. I cannot wait to see you all there. With that being said, let's get into today's case, and just a warning, it is a truly disturbing and devastating one. Kaylea Titford was born in 2004 to parents Alon Titford and Sarah Lloyd Jones, and she had 5 siblings, all whom lived together in a home in Powys, Wales. Kaylea was born with hydrocephalus and spina bifida, 2 diagnoses that are very strongly associated with one another. Spina bifida is a relatively common birth defect where the neural tube does not properly form or close all the way. Spina bifida happens in utero within the earliest stages of gestation. When the neural tube doesn't fully close, the vertebrae that protect your spinal cord don't fully form. There are 3 different types of spina bifida. Spina bifida occulta, the mildest form, happens when there's a small gap in the spine, but there's no opening in the fluid sac, and the spinal cord and nerves are typically not affected. As many as 15% of all healthy people have spina bifida occulta and have no idea. There are typically no symptoms, but it can sometimes cause pain in some people. The second type is meningocele, which happens when a sac of nerve fluid pushes through the opening in the baby's back, but the spinal cord is not in that sac and the nerves are typically not affected. With this type, there may be mild disabilities or some pain. The most severe form is myelomeningocele. When people are talking about spina bifida, this is typically the type they're referring to. This is what Kaylea Titford had. With this form of spina bifida, the sac of nerve fluid comes through the opening in the back containing part of the spinal cord and nerves. This causes nerve damage, which can lead to more severe disability. The level in which the nerve damage occurs will determine which nerves, thus which muscles, are affected. If it's higher up on the lumbar spine, then it's likely that the person will be pretty much paralyzed from the waist down. If it's lower, they may have partial nerve innervation to certain muscles, meaning they may still be able to walk with some assistance. With myelomeningocele spina bifida often comes hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is the buildup of fluid within the ventricles located deep within the brain. This excess fluid increases the size of these ventricles, thus putting more pressure on the brain. If there's too much pressure placed on the brain without treatment, it can cause brain damage. The reason these conditions often coincide is because with spina bifida, the fluid comes from the spinal column not properly draining, causing the fluid to build up. But with proper and timely treatment, hydrocephalus can be fixed and the person may not have any sort of lasting cognitive issues. And that seems to be the case with Kaylea. She had totally normal brain functioning, meaning she did not have any sort of intellectual disability. However, Kayley's spina bifida caused her to be unable to move or feel much sensation in her legs, so she relied on a wheelchair to get around. She was also unable to control her bowel and bladder movements, so she wore a catheter and a brief, which needed to be changed anytime she went to the bathroom. Her mother, Sarah, had previously worked as a caretaker throughout most of her life, but at one point, she started staying home full-time to help care for Kaylea. Meanwhile, Alun worked as a removal worker, which is basically someone who will transport heavy items like furniture from one place to another. It was said that Alun often worked very long hours, sometimes working for a week or two at a time without breaks, clocking in 50 or 60 hours some weeks. Now, Kaylea was described as funny, determined, and fiercely independent. She could be quite chatty and loved making new friends with anyone who gave her the time of day. She loved playing card games, board games, and strategy games. She could be just about anyone in Jenga or even pool, which was one of her favorites. She did have a learning assistant to help her with things she simply couldn't do at school, but beyond that, she was known to be stubborn, refusing to rely on anyone for help unless she absolutely needed it. She went to a regular high school where she pushed herself around in her wheelchair, refusing to allow anyone to even open a door for her because she could do it herself. She was also known to be a good student overall, having a near-perfect attendance and always giving each of her classes 100%. Kaylea started training for basketball when she was around 10, and from there, she went on to play all throughout her preteen and early teen years. Her coach went on to say that Kaylea was an impressive player. She took to wheelchair basketball like a duck to water. She was highly competitive and determined, standing out among her peers. With the right push, she could have even gone on to compete in the Paralympics. But as she got older, those around her started to notice a shift in her personality and how she looked. She started to become quieter and more withdrawn and started to gain a lot of weight. Now, it was said that Kaylea struggled with her weight all throughout her life. From the time that she was 3 years old, she was classified as overweight. Medical staff who worked with her came up with a plan to better her diet and nutrition, hoping to stabilize her weight. For a while, this seemed to work. She was eating better, was pretty active, and overall healthier. Even when she was playing basketball, she had always been a little bit overweight, but it did seem to be under control, at least for a while. But by the time COVID hit, everything in Kaylea's life took a turn for the worst. By March of 2020, when lockdowns were starting to take effect, Kaylea lost virtually all contact with the outside world. She stopped going to school in person. She could no longer play on the basketball team. Her weight gain snowballed and got out of control due to her lack of physical activity and inability to leave the house. That, coupled with the fact that Kaylea stopped attending any of her medical appointments. Now, I want to note that as Kaylea hit puberty, her parents took her to fewer medical appointments. She did have a care team up until 2017 to address all of her needs. She was getting physical therapy, nutrition therapy, and various other treatments that aimed at improving her health and quality of life. But around 2017, Sarah told her care team that she didn't feel that she needed them anymore. From there, she stopped showing up to scheduled appointments, so the various medical providers stopped scheduling them. She fell off their schedules, and they figured that Kaylea just didn't need their services any longer. So, there was a gradual decline before COVID, but by the time the lockdowns took effect, she stopped seeing any medical professionals altogether, and her parents started to decline any and all efforts for help, even if it was just over the phone or even if it was someone coming to their home. By May of 2020, Kaylea's mother, Sarah, had a phone appointment with a doctor at the Birmingham's Children's Hospital. During this call, she assured the doctor that she did not need any assistance for Kaylea. Things were going just fine. By August of 2020, others who specialized in care for youth and teens also reached out to the family to offer help, but Sarah and Alun continuously denied. So even though Kaylea did have some specialized needs and required at least some level of skilled care, no one outside of her family was checking on her. Then, by September of 2020, schools started opening back up and allowing students to come to class in person. But Kaylea didn't return. School staff reached out to Sarah and Alon to inquire about Kaylea, but they were always given various excuses as to why she couldn't come in. One time, Sarah said it's because Kaylea was sick. Another time, it was because of her appointments. Another time, it was because, she said that Kaylea was anxious and didn't want to come back to school in person because, she was being bullied by her peers. But this really stood out to staff who knew Kaylea because, again, she was always known as having good attendance at school, and she was always known as enjoying herself when she was there. So it was very unusual and concerning that she didn't show up even after the schools reopened. This continued for months, and even though no one had seen or heard from Kaylea, including medical professionals and school staff, no one called Child Protective Services. No one thought to go and check in on her. Because if they had, they would have found that Kaylea was suffering. For months, she suffered day in and day out as her needs were being continuously neglected and her body began to break down. By the morning of October 10th, 2020, 999 received a call from Alon Titford, who reported that his daughter, then 16-year-old Kaylea, was unconscious and unresponsive in her bed. The dispatcher asked him to check if she was breathing, and he said that she was cold and probably already dead. She instructed him to get his daughter on the floor, but he said that he was unable to lift her.
Okay, is the patient awake?
I don't know, love. I just had a photo of my son now. He did wake his daughter up and he said she's cold and she won't wake up.
Okay. Okay, and where exactly is she?
In the bedroom, they got a downstairs bedroom for her.
Okay. What's the patient's name?
Kaylea Titford.
Hello there, we've received a call. Is it from your mother there? Is this number...
Yeah,
Are you with the Kaylea Titford there?
yeah.
Okay, so are you with the patient there now?
No, I can't.
Okay, so we received a call to say that you're unable to wake her. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay, and just confirm how old the patient is, please.
16.
16, okay. And is the patient awake?
Oh,
Okay, and are you able to wake them?
no,
Okay, and are they breathing?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we're going to help her now there, okay? So I'm going to talk you how to do it there. Just confirm, is she still unconscious?
No,
And are you able to wake her?
Kaylea. Oh, cold.
Okay, stay on the line and I'll tell you exactly what to
Yeah,
do next, okay? Are you right by her now?
yeah.
Okay, are you able to, I need you to get her onto the floor there. Can you lay her flat on her back on the floor and remove
No,
any
she's
pillows?
too big. She's got spine deformation, overweight.
Can somebody help you there? Have you got somebody else there at the property to help you?
I got my son, but he's upstairs in bed. I'm going to have that.
Okay, we really need to help her there now, okay? So we need to get her onto the floor. If there is somebody there that can help you,
We never get it back up. Honestly, she's
that's fine. We need to help her there now, okay? Don't worry about getting her back up there. We need to
gone.
get her onto the floor.
I'm trying to get her onto the floor. Hello?
Hello?
I can't touch you, I'm sorry.
Okay, so we can still help her there now, okay? Who else is in the property with you?
My partner and my daughter.
Okay, so we need to help her there now, okay? We are coming to you as soon as we can, but we need to help her there now before we do arrive, okay? So it's really important we get her onto the floor.
I just go get my partner.
Okay. How are you doing there now?
Yeah, the paramedics are here.
Are they in the room with you?
They've just gone back out for the van.
Okay, so let me know when they're in the room with you, but we do need to help her before they do get to her there, okay? So is she on the
Yeah,
floor there?
they've already been in. They brought the stuff in.
Okay, so we need to get her onto the floor there, okay? Before they do get to her there.
Yeah, they're here.
Are they in the room with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you go with them, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, bye.
By 8:10 a.m., first responders arrived to the home, and when they did, they were met with the horrendous, egregious conditions under which Kaylea had been living for the final months of her life. When paramedics made their way into Kaylea's room, they were immediately hit with a foul smell that made them gag. They then saw Kaylea, who was sitting up in her bed, but it was obvious that she was already dead. Surrounding her in that room was clutter, trash, filth, and dirt. There were water bottles and catheters full of urine all around the bed, as well as numerous used junk food containers, McDonald's cups, and soda bottles, plus bags and boxes from takeout restaurants. There was an old kitchen appliance in the room, on top of which sat a dirty fryer with fat dripping down the sides. There was a large cake inside a box on the table as well. They saw that Kaylea had lived in an adapted room full of equipment to allow her to get around, but it was clear that this equipment hadn't been used in a very long time. There was a bunch of clutter sitting atop Kaylea's wheelchair, which she had long outgrown. They also found a Hoyer lift in the room, which is used to help someone who is immobilized get up from their bed. But it was covered in cobwebs, meaning once again it hadn't been used in a long time. Her adaptive toilet was surrounded in dog feces and clutter. I want to note that the rest of the house and all the other bedrooms were much cleaner than Kaylea's. They weren't pristine or anything like that, but it was clear that Kaylea's room was used as a bathroom spot for the dog and a dumping ground for all of their trash and clutter. When they got closer to inspect Kaylea, they found that her hair was matted and dirty, and her toenails hadn't been cut in at least 6 months. At that time, they were met with the worst odor they've ever smelt, making some of the officers, even the most experienced ones, physically sick. The smell was coming from her legs, which had been wrapped in absorbent puppy pads, which were completely soiled. When removing those pads, they found that Kaylea's legs were covered in ulcers. We've discussed ulcers in so many previous videos, so we won't get too far into the details today, but for those of you who need a reminder, a pressure ulcer is caused by prolonged pressure placed on one area of the skin without relief. Someone like Kaylea, who is unable to move her legs, is much more susceptible to developing pressure ulcers. Hers were so bad that her skin broke down past the skin, past the layer of fat, past the muscles, past the tendons, and reached her bone. So she had all these holes in her legs that exposed her bone. First responders at the scene said that the pressure ulcers are the worst they had ever seen. When they finally moved her body from the disgusting bed she was forced to lay on, they found that the mattress was covered in a bug infestation with more than 100 dead flies stuck to her and her surroundings.
It is 12:19 on Saturday 10th of October 2020, and this is the bed of Kaylea Titford.
So, as we can see, for God knows how long, Kaylea was made to live in absolute squalor. She had to lay on a mattress covered in urine and feces while her skin broke down. As that happened, maggots started finding their way to her, nestling in her skin and eating away at the rotting flesh. After this horrific discovery, Kaylea's body was sent to the medical examiners for an autopsy. There, it was found that Kaylea was severely obese at the time of her death. She weighed in at 146 kilograms or over 300 pounds with a BMI of around 70. The ME determined that she died as a result of inflammation and infection in extensive areas of ulceration arising from obesity and its complications, as well as from her mobility. So now going back to the scene of when first responders initially found Kaylee's body. They spoke with her parents, who said that they last saw Kaylea at around 11 p.m. the prior night. The next morning, Alon said that he was woken by his wife, who let him know that Kaylea was in her bed, dead. His first move was to call his mother, informing her of what happened. She, of course, was baffled by this, by the fact that he called her first, and she told him to call 999 to report it, not her, and she too also called 999 herself. They then both basically said that they didn't realize how bad conditions had gotten for Kaylea. I'll get more into this in a few minutes, but both Sarah and Alon acted like they had no idea what Kaylea had been going through. So from there, officers conducted a further investigation to see how exactly all of this happened and how Kaylea ended up in the position she was left in. They found that after the COVID lockdowns began, Sarah and Alon got lazy and stopped providing any sort of care for Kaylea. In the months leading to her death, they ate fast food about 5 times per week, spending over 1,000 pounds on fast food during that time. All the while, they ignored Kaylea and left her in her room to fend for herself, knowing damn well that she needed help getting into a wheelchair and to the toilet. But like I said, 16-year-old Kaylea wasn't totally defenseless. She was smart, and she knew exactly what was happening. For the 3 months leading to her death, she begged for her parents to help her, and they simply ignored her. Investigators found several texts from and about Kaylea within the family. About 2 months before Kaylea's death, her older sister Sophie texted her mom to complain about the state of Kaylea's room. She wrote, "Not being funny, but you need to sort Kaylea's room. It's a effing mess." Continuing, "Nothing can be found because of what a mess it is. It's disgusting. Kaylea had a bag of piss left from this morning and yesterday on the floor. It's effing disgusting, Mom." A few weeks after that, they found Kaylea had also texted her mom, begging her for help. In September, she wrote, "Can you come and check if I've pooped because it stinks?" To which Sarah replied, "FFS," which means for F's sake. Of note, when someone is paralyzed from the waist down, they can't control their bowel and bladder most of the time, but a lot of the times they also can't feel when they're going. So all of that ties into why they need a catheter and briefs to catch when they do go, because they can't always make it to the toilet because they don't always know when they're going to go. Of course, these need to be periodically changed to make sure that you're staying clean and free from infection. Throughout those 3 months, there are also numerous texts from Kaylea to her mom asking for help in cleaning her ulcers because her legs are leaking. In another text, she complains that there's bugs everywhere in her room that were driving her crazy, and all her mom had to say was, "They like you a lot, LOL." Then, just hours before her death, there are a few texts from Kaylea to her dad begging him for help, but they went ignored. By 10:30 p.m. the night of October 9th, the day before she was found dead, Alon texted Kaylea saying, "If you have a bad chest, stop screaming," sending another text shortly after saying, "Why do you keep screeching?" But by that point, her phone had already been turned off. Clearly, though, we can see that Kaylea spent her final hours alone in her room, suffering pain excruciating enough that she was literally screaming out for help. But again, she was just ignored. Of course, after finding all of this out, investigators wanted answers from her parents. When questioned, they each basically pointed the finger at each other. Sarah basically said that after COVID hit, she became depressed and stopped having the energy to cook or do much around the house. She did have a documented history of depression, which only got worse after she was locked in her home. She and her whole family were all eating fast food all the time, and even though she knew that Kaylea had gained a lot of weight, she never thought anything of it because they're all on the heavier side. As far as I can see, though, she didn't have much of an explanation for the disgusting, dirty conditions her room was in. She also tried denying that she sent those text messages to Kaylee, saying that someone else must have gotten her phone. But of course, we know that's not true. On the other hand, Alon placed sole blame for this on Sarah. He said that when Kaylee was growing up, he was very involved in her care. But after she hit puberty, he was uncomfortable with caring for her. That meant that Sarah carried the sole responsibility of caring for all of Kaylee's needs, which I guess could be understandable to a degree. If I were Kaylee, I wouldn't want my dad saying my lady bits, even if it was to help me bathe or change a catheter. But everything else, from transferring her to her adaptive equipment, to cleaning up her room, or even just spending time with her, there's no excuse for why he couldn't or didn't do that. Either way, he said that he's been working long hours at his job. In the weeks before Kaylee's death, he actually worked 15 days in a row without a break. He said that the last time he saw Kaylee was 2 weeks before her death on her 16th birthday. He had gone in her room, gave her a hug and kiss, and wished her a happy birthday. Then I guess he just didn't even bother to acknowledge her for weeks after. He said that from there, he never noticed a smell coming from Kaylee's room. He acknowledged that she was in fact screaming the night before her death and that, he ignored it, but this was something that she did apparently quite often. She was known to sit in her room and scream out for help all the time, whether it was because she needed help with her TV or she was mad at a sibling for touching her phone. She could scream about just about anything, so that is why he ignored her most of the time and that night. He thought that this was just another incident of her screaming out for no reason. He also said that even though he knew that Kaylee was gaining weight and had become obese, he too thought that it wasn't anything to worry about because the whole family was a bit overweight. He never thought that it could be detrimental to her health to the extent that it was. Basically, he claimed total ignorance, saying that he had no idea what was happening, so the full blame should be placed solely on Sarah's shoulders. But of course, it was apparent to investigators that anyone living in that home would have been fully aware of what Kaylee was going through. The smell alone would have alerted Alon that something was wrong. But even beyond that, even though he said he trusted Sarah to care for Kaylee, the fact that he didn't even check on her for an entire 2 weeks shows just how little he cared. Even if you work long hours, even if your wife cares for the kids most of the time, as a father, it's still your job to check on them at the very least. Due to this, both Sarah and Alon were charged with gross negligence manslaughter in relation to Kaylea Titford's death. Of course, given that this was right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, this case took quite a while to make its way through the court systems. So it wasn't until December of 2022 when 39-year-old Sarah Lloyd Jones pleaded guilty to her charges, accepting responsibility for the gross negligence that led to her daughter's death. She admitted that she fed her daughter so poorly that it led her to gain significant amounts of weight, which contributed to her diminishing ability to move and care for herself. All the while, she completely neglected her duties as a mother, leaving her alone in that room to quite literally rot to death. Meanwhile, Alon pleaded not guilty to his charges, maintaining that Sarah is to blame for everything. Over 2 years after the death of his daughter, he finally went to trial for his charges in January of 2023. The prosecution outlined everything that I've told you up to this point. 16-year-old Kaylea was an independent, driven teenager who liked school and took care of herself whenever possible, but she did need help. However, after the COVID lockdowns, her parents simply gave up on her and stopped giving her any of the assistance she needed. They only gave her unhealthy junk food, which she ate because what else is she gonna have? When you're paralyzed, you end up building a lot of upper body and core strength to help lift yourself and transfer yourself. Some people can do this on their own, especially with a lot of practice, but others need help. And just as with any person, the more weight you have on your body, the harder it's going to be to get those tasks done, the harder it's going to be to move your body. So as Kaylea gained more and more weight, it got harder and harder for her to care for herself. All the while, her parents ignored her and refused to help her in any way. So there she was, stuck in her room, fully aware that her body was breaking down, fully aware that she was stuck living in a bed of filth, maggots, urine, and feces, fully aware that no matter how loud she screamed, how desperately she begged for help, she was going to be ignored. And I do also just want to mention that, yes, she had her own cell phone. She technically could have reached out to emergency services or other family members. But again, this is a 16-year-old. She may not have realized her options because she's living in this home with her mother and father. If they're ignoring her, if her siblings are ignoring her, if nobody is helping her in any way, she may have just felt hopeless, like nobody cares about her, not even the police, not even her teachers. She spent her last days and hours suffering from unimaginable anguish. She was humiliated by having to live in those conditions. She was stripped of all her dignity, her right to live in a clean, safe home. And her own parents, who once loved her and cared for her, couldn't care less. Of course, on the other hand, the defense said that this was all Sarah's fault. She was fully responsible for Kaylea's care, while I guess Alon was fully left off the hook. He didn't want to be a father to her. He didn't care to even check in on her occasionally. He was fully unaware of how badly she was being treated because, in his own words, he got lazy. Too lazy to care. But again, as I said earlier, the smell coming from her room was unbearable. It was impossible not to notice. Not only that, but Alon admitted himself that he heard her quite literally screaming for help, but didn't do anything about it. So no matter what he wants to claim, he's just as responsible as Sarah for the death of his 16-year-old daughter. After both sides presented their evidence and made their closing arguments, the jury was off for deliberation. And when they came back after about 5 hours of deliberating, they found that then 45-year-old Alon Titford was equally culpable in Kaylea's horrific death. He too was found guilty of negligent manslaughter. After both convictions, in March of 2023, Alon and Sarah were sentenced at a joint hearing. When making his decision on Sarah's sentence, the judge considered the fact that Sarah had depression, which could have contributed to her mental state at the time. However, he determined that she did not suffer from any sort of mental disorder or learning disability to the extent that it affected her decision-making, therefore holding her fully accountable for her actions. He also considered Alon's past history of mental disorders, but once again, he found that he was not suffering from anything severe enough to explain away his actions either. Alon stated himself, and the judge agreed that he just got lazy. So in the end, Sarah and Alon were each given a sentence of 7 years and 6 months behind bars, but due to Sarah's guilty plea, she was given credit for 20%, reducing her total sentence to just 6 years.
The conditions in which Kaylea was left to die were fairly described by the Crown as unfit for any animal. However, there was no deliberate cruelty. There is no evidence of dislike or of targeting. It is a case of criminal neglect and gross negligence. It is a particularly serious case of its kind, and that does require some upward movement from the guideline starting point. Sarah Lloyd-Jones is entitled to credit for her guilty plea. Following the sentencing guideline, I assess the appropriate credit to be 20%. That reduces the sentence in her case from 7 years, 6 months to 6 years. Alon Titford did not plead guilty and gets no credit. For the gross negligence manslaughter of Kaylea Titford, I sentence you to 7 years, 6 months imprisonment. You will serve 2/3 of the sentence, namely 5 years, in custody before you are released on licence. When you are released, you will be on licence until the end of this sentence.
However, after these sentences were handed down, the court ended up reviewing the case. they didn't feel that enough emphasis was placed on the horrific conditions under which Kaylea was forced to live. They called this a deeply unsettling and distressing case, saying that this kind of child abuse and neglect should never be tolerated, and they want to show that. So as a result, they actually upped their sentences. As of May of 2023, Alun will now be serving 10 years behind bars, while Sarah will be serving 8. Of course, I'm very happy that their sentences were increased, but even after this, it still isn't enough. The amount of torment and suffering Kaylea went through in her final hours is nothing any human, let alone a child, should ever face. I can't imagine the feeling of knowing your body is breaking down, smelling the horrendous stench coming from your own wounds, seeing the bugs infesting your skin, and knowing you can't do anything about it. She cried, literally screamed out for help, but no one came for her. Putting another human being through that is truly monstrous, and I truly hope that Alun and Sarah live every single day haunted by the screams of their daughter they refused to help. That's what they deserve. I know this was a truly devastating case. It was so difficult to hear, to see the photos of what she lived through, but I am glad that her parents at least have been made to face the consequences, even if it's not nearly enough time. But that is all the information I have on today's case, and now I want to hear what you guys all think. Do you agree that Sarah and Alun played equal parts in her death, or do you think it was mostly Sarah's responsibility? Do you think either of them got long enough sentences, and what do you think of them being increased? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell too on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, as well as Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.